Hi everyone, just a really quick one on Bitcoin. So this, per yesterday's update, just held the level I was looking at. Let me go into the CME chart quickly. So CME, I was wanting in the first instance, but I always wait for the more conservative in the first instance, a test of this 8 hour, or was it 12 hour, 8 hour or 12 hour demand that had been made, 8 hour demand that had been made down there. It's subsequently flipped to daily as well. Ideally I wanted to close with the CME gap and or the lower one. So I mean, I wasn't trading yesterday, so I didn't trade this. Yeah, it just went straight from there. Well, it took some time, messed around, but then created 4 hour demand. Another 4 hour demand, now has a 12 hour before taking off this morning while I was asleep. Kind of interesting actually. I made the comment yesterday that I said I wouldn't be surprised if it did something similar to September the 9th, 2022. I mean, it's different context entirely, but just the structure of the correction. I go back to it quickly. Here, just these sort of choppy waves down, and it's kind of what, I mean, this would basically take out last week's high entirely if it did the same as this one did. At the moment I've got an alert sort of stopping in the equivalent of the first drop, but also the first drop in the current case has a bigger wick. But yeah, this is kind of part of the reason I was saying I think it will take out the local 3-day supply and go through it up to closer to the highs. So you can see the similarity here. You know, it's got one consolidation, second drop consolidation, and third drop. So the 5 wave moved down. Yeah, that original one also went up to the 61 fib. So again, like if this goes to a more appropriate fib level, we could be looking around 44,600 or something like that, which would coincide broadly with the high of the range before the fake out or the fake outs. But yeah, again, so for me, I just don't trade randomly in the middle of these types of areas. So I would look potentially for a swing fail of that 44,650. I'll leave that level in there. But other than that, I'm going to stick for the moment to the levels that I've got, or a swing fail of this weekly high here at 43,500. You can see now we're starting to move up through the into the 3-day. Had the initial rejection, but now I'm on the Ether chart. I was wondering why it was looking a bit weird. On the Ether, I've got them on my other screen. I've got the 30-second chart. Yeah, so it's starting to move up here. I obviously expect to take out those highs at this point, but then we'll see how many highs it chooses to go for, and or if it just chooses to go straight back up again. CME, obviously there's a high here going into 42,365, and there was a 370 premium last time I looked. So if that went to 42,365, then this would be to around the 42 mark. So yeah, we'd also take out those highs, and then would be between the 61 and 70 fibs. So that's a sort of reasonable zone to start looking for shorts. But again, like I say, I'm slightly more conservative in this zone here that wasn't tested after the drop last Thursday. Korea is just aligning well at the moment. It's got a 3-day supply, and again, could potentially get up into that 8 hour above. So I guess we'll see. You know, we are in 3-day supply, so if you start seeing short entries, there is nothing wrong with taking them. The other thing to be aware of, I guess, is that we're going to have the weekly close on CME. Let's just look at that quickly. And obviously now, like, it just depends whether we stay up here throughout New York or whether it's going to BART its way back down again. But at this stage, I mean, the CME isn't quite as clean as the US dollar chart, because we already had this red candle close below the low, or even the low here, depending on which one you choose to look at. Yeah, essentially the weekly candle that could potentially close quite strongly back into the range. So that's something worth considering. And it was similar to what we had down here, except this was on the 3 weekly, that where we kind of went up a couple of times, came back down, but didn't break the low, and then always just closed back in the range. And are we going to form something similar here on the weekly or even on the 3 weekly a few weeks down the track? So yeah, just keeping an eye on the retest here to see if the 3-day supply holds on the US dollar pair. You know, I would suggest going and having a look where the walls are. There haven't been anything significant in so far. Where is it? Tensor. Just the usual 100 Bitcoin walls that we've seen. So we do have a couple above, but nothing massive. And that 1,000 wall doesn't appear to have reappeared as yet. But there's actually not much supply going on in there at the moment. But also not much demand either. So the demand is still fairly weak. Down to 38,500 is where the biggest 270 Bitcoin wall is. Yeah, so that's Bitcoin. If it comes back down, I know there's people who want to long here. I wouldn't, rightly or wrongly. I'm too used to seeing trend lines taken out and things like that, so I would still like to look at these levels if we come back here, because that's the thing. Like, what Bitcoin tends to do is if it does break up, it doesn't normally give you a nice re-entry. So it can do, it's possible it comes down and just bounces in this 12-hour and takes off again, but I'd rather just see it keep going, and then if it ends up coming back here, it's potentially going to go straight through the level. We'll see. You can see on locally we've just created a new sort of fairly poor hourly demand in here as well. We may create a 2-hour, but yeah, the price is still moving up. It's now exactly hit the 61 fib, so I guess we'll see. The only thing that sort of makes me, I guess, slightly more bearish as well is what Ether's doing. So Ether hasn't even managed to make it outside of the range. Is at this stage, it's made the same hourly, but at this stage is sort of swing failing the high. Not managed to get any higher. The Bitcoin pair, again, could see just a stop hunt of this low, but it's edging towards where I want it to be. So I'd like to see the potential for this to become more interesting if we can get it dropped a bit lower. And then maybe we'll see a bit of Bitcoin going sideways over the weekend while Ether and all the other alts can catch up a bit. Yeah, we do have a monthly unconfirmed level here, so there is a bit of support where we currently are, but then obviously the preference is a bit lower down here, and just see what the reaction is we have on weekly demand. Ether also made 4-hour and 8-hour demand underneath. Because these are still within range, I'd be more inclined to look at them for longs on the basis that these might test without Bitcoin dumping, or without Bitcoin coming all the way back down. I mean, certainly if Bitcoin does reject here or above and come all the way back down to this level, then Ether's going to break down, so those won't be good longs on these local areas. But yeah, it could be worth considering. Like if we get Bitcoin holding and Ether coming back down to test this level, I would be much more comfortable looking for a long on Ether. But it really hasn't gone anywhere so far, and as I've said previously, I would have liked it to have taken out these lows as well, and it's just made very, very slightly higher lows. Oops, wrong indicator. Maybe very, very slightly higher lows off this previous low. And you know, it's got a lot of space. Like if it's got, you know, the 8-hour supply in the between and range high. But also if it does want to move, it can really move. But I probably want to see that happen potentially when this hits the weekly demand. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, look for confluence. So when this comes down to hit the 4-hour, if it comes down to hit the 4-hour, look for confluence of where Bitcoin is at. Is Bitcoin at a local support? If Bitcoin's sort of, you know, breaking down from up here and starting to fall off a cliff, then I wouldn't advise looking for longs on Ether. So similarly, on the other point, I guess, is on the US dollar pair. Like I would, again, this is hitting some hourly demand, but I prefer this down here before I look for shorting Bitcoin. So again, I want to see, while we might get interim bounces and we have some sort of trend line going on here, I think this is the long-term historic trend line. Not something I consider particularly. You know, I wanted it to hold this orange level, or maybe slightly below it can go to, because there's a 12 hour or 4 hour, the wicks are slightly lower than the calculated version on the daily. But I would like to see this start to move up at some point, either that or down here, preferably down here, or it could even go to the 4 day. So there's a 3 day here zone there and a 4 day zone below that hasn't been tested, so it could go to either of those before looking for that bounce, and or significantly to the 4 hour at the bottom. So again, we were looking for that rejection off weekly supply on this, and at this point it's looking for a lower low, but we can look for the bounces on those interim levels, again, in case the overall thing is a reversal on Bitcoin and everything else. Yeah, so I think that's about it. Korea's just only barely managed to make a higher high there, and the same with CME. US dollar pair's gone a little bit higher. Yeah, not much else to add, I don't think. So the main things to look for are Ether, possible retest of this 4 hour while Bitcoin's still holding, and or swing failure of the lows. Bitcoin, you can keep an eye on this 12 hour demand if it retests down there, but my preference is still for below this consolidation, just because of the way the structure works. And even then, you know, we could still get that drop further. So I don't necessarily think this is certain for a bounce here. And again, if you look back at that, let's go back to that September consolidation quickly. Try and do it this way because it's a little bit quicker. What was it? September 2022, the 9th. Is the right one? Where are we? Yes. So I mean, we're still basically at this point in time with this equivalent at the moment, so it's a long way to go, but you can see when it comes back to the equivalent zone, like it has got a small bounce and then it's gone out and taken out the lows. So, you know, the 4 hour here might even not be a very good entry, but, you know, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, because there's other consolidations. So you can see part of the reason I'm saying it as well is you can see, for example, here, it's things like this, you know, when we see these consolidation pumps, quite often we come back through on the retest and do these sort of barts, but don't necessarily break the low, or don't necessarily break the low on the first bounce, but they don't tend to hold if we come back. So again here, slightly different picture, but has come back through, hasn't held, or, you know, it wicked through and did bounce. But yeah, there's a reasonable amount of those on the charts, so I'm slightly wary, and particularly when it hasn't taken stops to start with. So it hasn't really taken any stops for the last couple of days, and it didn't since Wednesday. Yeah, so I guess we shall see what happens. And then as far as shorts, you can start looking from now and all up until there. Ether, I didn't really say much about shorts. Yeah, it was sort of the upper area and possibly this 8 hour in here if it comes up here. For me, it's a little bit aggressive to short when you're coming off a weekly demand, so I don't love that one. But again, more just watching Ether BTC here and see if it gives you signs that Ether's going to show some strength against BTC, because then if we're ready to move up, or if BTC is still holding, then Ether might get the bigger move out of that. Okay, hope that's helpful. Any questions, let me know in chat. And I might try and do a stream later on some of the alts. Just debating how to do it, because I really just want to chart alts without having to talk. So I might just record myself charting and see if anybody's got any interest in that or not.